Stop looking at the record. Seriously, stop looking at the win-loss column and actually watch the tape. The media sees a loss and writes the team off. We see context. Look at this resume. They want you to believe Kentucky is struggling. Really? Look closer. They lost to Louisville, ranked 24 by 8 points on the road. They lost a one-possession game to Clemson on the road. They lost a 3-point nail-biter to North Carolina, ranked 16 on a neutral floor. These aren't bad losses. These are wars. The only time it actually got beat up was against Gonzaga. And let's be honest, Gonzaga is a buzzsaw this year. But outside of that, Kentucky isn't losing games. They're going toe-to-toe with the best teams in the country and falling short by a single shot, a single possession, a single mistake. The committee sees losses. I see a team that is battle-tested. And come March, that's going to matter a lot more than a pretty record. Now, here's where it goes from annoying to outrageous. On paper, Kentucky is 0-4 against ranked opponents. Fine. You know what the voters did with that? They quietly gave Kentucky 29 AP votes. 29. That's the 7th most of any unranked team. In other words, the same people who erased Kentucky from the top 25 still think they're top 30 quality. They just don't want to show you the logo on screen. That's the scam. Publicly, Kentucky doesn't belong. Privately, on the ballot, they're too good to ignore. You can't have it both ways. If you think Kentucky is good enough to deserve 29 votes, then put them at 24 or 25 and own it. If you think they're trash, don't vote for them at all. Instead, they stash Kentucky in this fake purgatory called receiving votes so they can pretend the system is fair while the graphic says Kentucky is gone. And when you line up the actual games, it gets even more ridiculous. Louisville by 8 away. Clemson by 4 away. North Carolina by 3, neutral. Those are the margins. That's the resume. By the AP poll's own logic, those are quality losses against ranked teams and brand name programs in big conferences. The whole point of quality loss is supposed to be exactly this. You don't punish a team for taking big swings against heavyweight opponents. Unless, apparently, that team is Kentucky under Mark Pope. Computers see it. Ken Palm has Kentucky at 12. Bart Torvik has them at 15. Evan Mia has them at 15. 3 independent models, 3 different approaches, all putting Kentucky somewhere in that 12 to 15 range. Meanwhile, the AP voters have them worse 25. That gap is the smoking gun. The algorithms are saying this is a top 15 team. The humans are saying, yeah, but that doesn't fit the story we're selling this week. And then we get to Gonzaga, the golden child of narrative protection. Look at the timeline. Before the Kentucky game, Gonzaga is sitting at 11 in the AP poll, coming off a 40-point humiliation against Michigan, 101-61. Worst loss of the Mark Few era. First 40-point loss for that program since 1990. That should be a ranking death sentence if margin of defeat actually matters, right? But they barely move. They sit there at 11, cushioned, protected, wrapped in bubble wrap because the voters have already decided who Gonzaga is supposed to be. Then Gonzaga plays Kentucky. Gonzaga wins by 35, 94-59 on a neutral floor. Overnight, Gonzaga jumps from 11 to 8, up 3 spots off a single win. Same voters who shrugged at a 40-point embarrassment suddenly act like blowing out Kentucky is proof of divine right to the top 10. So let's lay this out clearly. A 40-point loss to Michigan doesn't define Gonzaga, but a 35-point loss to Gonzaga does define Kentucky. Same type of data point, completely different standard. Gonzaga loses by 40 and stays at 11. Gonzaga beats Kentucky by 35 and jumps to 8. Kentucky is on the other side of that exact same 35-point margin and gets wiped off the map. That tells you the margin itself was never the criterion. The name on the jersey doing the winning and losing is the criterion. Gonzaga is allowed to have a historic meltdown and recover instantly. Kentucky has one disaster night and it becomes their full identity. And here's the real sleight of hand. Beating Kentucky did 3 favors for Gonzaga at once. First, it erased that Michigan disaster from the voters' memory. Second, it gave them a free 3-spot bump into the top 10. Third, It required Kentucky to be shoved out of the rankings so that Gonzaga's jump would visually make sense. If Gonzaga beats a ranked Kentucky, Kentucky should still be ranked. If Kentucky is unranked, that win shouldn't launch Gonzaga into the stratosphere. To make the story clean, somebody had to be sacrificed. It wasn't going to be Gonzaga. Then we zoom in on the receiving votes trap. This is where the poll turns from biased to flat out fraudulent. Kentucky gets 29 votes and sits unranked. Oklahoma State gets 54 votes and is also unranked. Iowa gets 60 votes and unranked. Seton Hall gets 31 and unranked. So what are we doing here? If more than 50 people are willing to stick their name on a ballot for Oklahoma State and they're still not good enough to crack the 25, what does 29 votes really mean for Kentucky? It means nothing. It's window dressing. Receiving votes is the illusion of objectivity. It lets voters say, see, we respect you, we voted for you, while the graphic and the narrative say, you're out, you don't matter. With Kentucky, it's even more twisted. The same people who gave them those 29 votes are the ones who dropped them from 18 to unranked in a single week. They counted Kentucky when it was time to look smart on paper. They erased Kentucky when it was time to produce the show. And if you think this is a one-off, go back to Florida State in 2023. 13-0, undefeated. They lose their starting quarterback, Jordan Travis, in week 9. Everyone sees the offense fall off a cliff. Everyone knows they're not the same team. And what do we hear from the Pole Industrial Complex? Can't punish an undefeated team for injuries. Wins are wins. The games still count. Florida State sat comfortably at 4-5, anchored by preseason respect and a big fat 0 in the loss column. Now look at Kentucky in 2025. No, they're not undefeated. They're 5-4, but every loss is to a brand name program. Louisville, North Carolina, Gonzaga, and a road slip against Clemson. New coach, rebuild. Structural disadvantages everywhere you look. If the standard is don't punish a team for circumstances around the roster, Kentucky should get at least some protection, right? Instead, one 35-point loss turns into a full execution from 18 to unranked in 7 days. Florida State got protected during an on-field collapse. Kentucky got punished while going through the hardest part of a rebuild. So don't tell me this is about consistency. Don't tell me this is about objective standards. The pattern is simple. When the story's convenient, the voters bend over backwards to justify keeping a team where they started. When the story's inconvenient, they slam the eject button and hide behind the word losses. And here's the funniest part. They'll sit on TV and lecture you about body of work. Kentucky's body of work is brutal schedule, tight margins, high-end computer rankings, and one nuclear night against Gonzaga. Gonzaga's body of work is a 40-point humiliation, followed by a blowout win against the same Kentucky they just erased. Which one actually looks more like a roller coaster? Which one actually looks like a team the poll shouldn't fully trust yet? You know why Gonzaga gets the benefit of the doubt. You know why Florida State got the benefit of the doubt. Brand power, preseason narrative, conference politics. The AP poll isn't just ranking who's good. They're managing a storyline. Who sells as a top 10 brand? Who makes the graphic look right? Who fits the myth of we always knew they were elite? Kentucky under Mark Pope doesn't fit that myth yet. So the voters would rather pretend they don't exist. They'll let the computers say 12. They'll let the analytics say 15. They'll let the ballots quietly hand out 29 votes. But the one place that actually sets the conversation for casual fans, top 25 graphic, that's where Kentucky gets erased so Gonzaga can float safely in the top 10 and everyone can pretend this all makes sense. Here's the verdict. Kentucky didn't get dropped because of objective metrics. They got dropped because the voters needed narrative space. They needed to rehabilitate Gonzaga after Michigan. They needed to protect their preseason priors. They needed a clean story. Gonzaga back, Kentucky gone. Same data point, opposite reaction. One team's disaster is forgiven. One team's disaster becomes a death sentence. So yeah, if you just want to stare at the record, go ahead and repeat the talking point. 0-4 against ranked teams. Terrible blowout loss. Not a top 25 team. But if you actually watch the games, if you actually read the numbers, you see something completely different. You see a team that's taken every punch from ranked opponents and stayed on its feet. You see a team the computers love, the ballots quietly respect, and the poll refuses to acknowledge. In March, when that unranked Kentucky team is suddenly a nightmare matchup that nobody wants in their bracket, remember this week. Remember how fast the voters turned their back. Remember how one bad night mattered more more for Kentucky than a historic meltdown did for Gonzaga. The AP poll didn't just drop Kentucky. They declared war on Kentucky's legitimacy. And if you're paying attention, you don't have to salute.